Hi, it's Chris. I've been an enthusiast home barista reviewing the latest coffee gear to help you make an informed decision. In this video, I'm going to be sharing my thoughts and full review of the Aiden, a $365 premium coffee brewer from Fellow. I do already have a video posted with the unboxing and my first impressions of the machine, so if you haven't seen that yet, I suggest going back to check that one out first, then coming back to this video. Fellow did send me this unit for review, however this video is not sponsored, they are not paying me, and all thoughts and opinions remain my own. In this video, I'm going to go through the build quality, the workflow, the app, the coffee brews itself, and then end with some negatives and a final conclusion. I'll have timestamps available in the description for each segment if you want to hop around. So starting with the build quality, the best way to describe the Aiden is a plastic black box that brews good coffee. Now, I've said this before, plastic itself is not inherently a bad material. It can be done very well, and it can be done very poorly. The Aiden feels like a mix of both. For most of the machine, the plastic panels don't feel too bad, but there are some panel gaps and some slight misalignments, but given the extremely flat shape and right angles, it doesn't look bad at all from a distance. Comparing it to something like the Stag kettles, it feels cheaper for sure, but visually it fits right into the Fellow aesthetic. I do think the top lid with the integrated shower head could have been a little bit more rigid and sturdier, especially given how important this specific component is to the machine. Like mentioned in my first impressions video, the hinges are excellent with a nice snappy feeling to it. The dial itself is also great and easy to use, just like the Stag kettles if you're familiar with those. The removable components like the carafe and baskets all feel well made, and I don't think these parts will have any issues over time. Now, comparing this to the Mocha Master, which does have a mix of metal and plastic components, I do wish the Aiden had an overall more rigid housing, especially when you have the Brewer Precision Brewer being primarily metal for a little bit of a lower price point. Now, the first thing I want to talk about and quickly get out of the way is the cold brew function. It works by doing a hot bloom phase followed by slow drips of room temperature water from the reservoir over a set period of time to produce ready to drink cold brew. It's more akin to slow drip cold brew rather than steep and release kind of cold brew. And you can also create a custom profile and ratio to produce something more like a cold brew concentrate if that's what you're after. Now, generally speaking, I'm not a huge fan of cold brew unless it's with some nice sweetened cold foam, so I don't plan on using this function often. I did run it once and got surprisingly decent results with a cold brew that was a lot less bitter than the traditional fridge steep method. And that's really all I'm going to say about the cold brew offering. Now into the more juicy stuff. The Aiden has a few different settings. There's Instant Brew, which is your set it and forget it mode, which will default brew whatever water is in the tank in a pretty standard coffee brewing method. You can customize this mode with water and coffee ratio, but that's about it. Then you have the guided modes, which includes Fellow's predetermined profiles for light, medium, and dark, as well as your roaster-specific profiles from the app. These profiles, as well as custom ones you can create for yourself, allow you to modify temperature, overall brew ratio, bloom duration, bloom temperature, number of pulses, time between pulses, and pulse temperature. A lot of variables that are usually not customizable on most, if not all, other batch brewers. And that's really what makes the Aiden so unique. Now, I'm not going to go into detail on what each variable here does, because these are fairly standardized variables in a typical pour-over already, and for that there are loads of information out there discussing it. But say you want to try something new. Say you learned about the Samo bloom recipe and want to try it with the much cooler temperature bloom phase, you can program that right in on the Aiden, which I've done here. And based on my extremely scientific method of sticking a temperature probe underneath the spout with no filter in it, the hot water dispensed is very accurate, seemingly within 2 degrees Celsius-ish range. I do wish you could also add in a drawdown time feature to sort of tell the machine, hey, this brew should be done in about 3 minutes 30 seconds, but you can't. And the resulting time is automated based on the set parameters. I think adding in this feature would help people better dial in their grind size to fit the brew parameters. You can also change the settings based on a single serve versus a batch brew basket. One thing you can't do is change the volume of water for each of the individual pulses, so the machine seems to default to dividing the pulses evenly based on the total amount of water you have set. This means you can't program specific recipes that might require, let's say, 4 separate pulses of varying amounts of water. Now, because this machine heats water up basically instantly, similar to Breville's thermojet technology, I have a profile safe that literally just shoots out a cup of hot water at 90 degrees Celsius for things like brewing tea or hot chocolate. It's way faster than a kettle and a nice little feature. Now, this was all programmed on the machine itself, and ideally, you can do all this and more with the app. But there's not a lot to say about the app because, well, it still doesn't exist. At this point in time, the Aiden is shipping, but the app is nowhere to be found. Custom brew profiles were seemingly automatically loaded into my machine, including the custom profile for the bag of particle beans it arrived with, and a few other random ones popped up as well. I do hope with the app that this is customizable to better clean up the menu options on the display itself, although you can go in and delete the profiles if you want to, but again, because of the lack of the app, you won't be getting these back. But now let's talk about the most important feature, the coffee itself. The coffee produced by the Aiden is great. Despite being primarily a batch brewer, I believe its strengths lie in single-serve brews with cups very comparable to a pour-over done by hand. More often than not, if I was served a single-serve brewed cup from the Aiden that was advertised as a pour-over, I wouldn't be upset. As a batch brewer, it does work alright if you're willing to put in the effort to dial in a custom brew profile. It is also important to note that the single-serve brewer is cone-shaped while the batch is flat-bottomed. Now, when it comes to the grinder and grind size settings, I actually found that having more fines produced help produce a better brew more often than not. The Aiden is able to achieve better agitation in the brew by increasing the pressure of the water jets in the brew chamber, and added fines in the grinds help me produce a better cup versus a more uniform grind size. On my EG1, for example, I increased the RPM relatively high into the 1100 to 1200 range to help achieve this, and the same grind size and settings at this higher RPM with the added fines definitely gave me better results. In multiple batch brews, I've noticed the bed rarely settles uniformly, potentially as a result of the stronger pulses of water that are intended to help agitate the brew. This does translate into a cup that, while has decent flavor and clarity, does sometimes suffer in texture and mouthfeel compared to single-serve basket brews. And in programming, you can't actually tell the machine whether you want these stronger pulses versus some more gentler ones that you might want when you have full manual control. But overall, I am very happy with the results that I achieve out of this batch brewer. Comparing it to the Mocha Master I've been using daily for years, the results here are definitely better when properly dialed in. Now, that's not to say anything bad at all about the Mocha Master, which still produces a very pleasant brew more often than not, but it has practically no customizability. And regarding temperature with the stainless steel carafe, my current ambient room temp in the morning is pretty chilly, around 62 to 63 degrees Fahrenheit these days, so the carafe starts relatively cold. However, I found that brewing a 600ml batch, it stayed at a great drinking temperature for about 30 minutes, and then started to ever so slightly get cooler from there to a less and less enjoyable temperature. Overall though, no complaints about keeping coffee hot for a reasonable amount of time without a hot plate. So with all that being said, let's now talk about some of the negatives. In my own opinion and personal aesthetic preferences, the machine is a little bland. For some, it might be exactly what they're looking for with the minimalistic design, but for me, I prefer the look of something like the Mocha Master. A glass carafe would have also been great, but stainless steel makes sense when there is no hot plate to keep your brew hot, and glass would likely dissipate the heat quicker. Also, hot plates do tend to sometimes start cooking the coffee if there's a very small volume left in the carafe. Now, because of the matte black plastic finish, this will be very prone to picking up dust and fingerprints in a short period of time, so you will want to wipe this thing down fairly regularly. But aesthetics aside, there are definitely some workflow, software, and design kinks that you should be aware of. First, the Aiden doesn't seem to be able to tell you if you don't have enough water in the tank for a brew. I started a 600ml batch brew with about 400ml in the tank, and it gave no indication that it wouldn't be able to achieve the desired amount. Once it does reach the point of figuring out that there's no water, it starts to beep, alerting you that there is in fact no water. Which leads me to my first design kink, and that's if you have this machine pushed up into a left-hand corner somewhere, let's say under your kitchen cabinets, you won't be able to tell if your water tank has any water or not. A, because there is no visual water meter from the front, and B, because the tank itself is also tinted quite dark, it's going to be hard to see without a light source. The second design kink to be aware of is that both the single and batch baskets have a built-in auto-stop feature when you remove them from the brew chamber so that they don't drip everywhere when you go to throw out your filter papers. This is great. However, when you look at each basket installed, the batch basket does feature a more pronounced tip that integrates seamlessly with the carafe, so you can't actually see the drips and would have to pay more attention to sound to determine when your brew has fully drawn down. That makes it just a little bit more annoying to figure out how to properly dial in your grind size. But that also means that removing the carafe prevents the coffee from dripping further. On the single serve basket, you can actually see a little bit of a gap between the bottom and the carafe, so you can actually visually see as your brew draws down. However, removing the carafe does not stop the brew and it will keep dripping. Again, this is a single serve basket, so it's actually recommended to brew straight into a cup or a fellow mug. I did also notice that with a shorter cup that you will get some splashes, so it is better to use something taller in this case. Also important to note is that the batch brewer will not brew without the carafe and will tell you to insert it, but it does not remind you about a cup for single serve. I made this mistake once and came back to an absolute mess. That error is on me. Another nitpick is the handle integrated into the water reservoir, giving you a relatively narrow window of space to actually refill this thing. On more than one occasion, I've accidentally spilled some water over, which is mildly annoying, but again, nothing deal-breaking. It's probably easier to just lift the reservoir out altogether. And my last nitpick about the overall design is the lack of any venting. This leads to a lot of steam forming during brewing, and once your brew's done and you open up the chamber, there'll be a lot of water sliding down the lid and into the brew chamber. Now, I get that this was designed with intent to prevent steam from destroying your kitchen cabinets, but it is just something I thought I'd point out anyway. I am also hoping that the buildup of steam and just general liquid does not become a problem traveling down the gaps in the hinges and into parts of the machine that presumably might house some electronics. I haven't had any issues yet using this daily, but something just to keep in the back of my mind. Now, software-wise, I feel like the UI was mostly designed for a square screen with a circular cutout rather than software designed for a circular screen. Take the Apple Watch for example. The app icons move fluidly to fit the curved shape of the display, whereas on the Aiden, the text simply gets cut off abruptly. There have been a few UI elements that seemingly aren't centered with the display either. Text also gets overlaid with each other, like this example in the edit schedule mode, and sometimes just the casing is wrong. It's odd to me because the Stag Kettle has such wonderfully integrated software with UI designed with a circular screen in mind for the most part. There have been a few other software bugs, and it seems like the Aiden will sometimes randomly exit out of sleep mode and show you the menu screen rather than the clock. It's not a huge issue since it isn't turning anything on, but it is something to note. Now, that's not to say the whole UI is bad. Obviously, there are some elements on the Aiden that are designed for the circular screen, but could further be improved, hopefully via software update since it is Wi-Fi enabled through the app, assuming that's coming. So to wrap up this review, who is it for and is it worth it? This is not a Mocha Master killer. It's not a simple on-off experience that the Mocha Master offers, but that's kind of the point. I actually really like the Aiden. It performs quite well, being able to brew both single and batch with customized profiles or even roaster recommended profiles, and in a sleek package. It has strengths mainly in single serve cups from my experience, but is capable of a decent batch as well. But this machine does fall into the category of the X-Bloom for me. It's almost like trying to create a new niche target audience. Traditionally, if you're buying a batch brewer, you would likely understand it's mostly a set it and forget it situation, especially with long-standing machines like the Mocha Master being around for over half a century, still an iconic brewer with literally an on-off switch and no other customizability. In my opinion, the Aiden attempts to bridge the specialty light roast coffee crowd with the batch brew set it and forget it crowd. The challenge here is, do people that want a batch brewer really care about the granularity of being able to fine-tune every pulse of water and temperature? Are they not already going to be doing this with a manual pour-over and gooseneck kettle? Even for bigger brews, it's already been proven that we can get some good batch-sized brews with the rise of larger brewers like the Oria Big Boy, for example. But I think I actually fall into the audience for this machine. I can buy a nice light roast from a specialty coffee roaster, I'm able to download that profile to the machine, and can mostly set it and forget it once the grind size is dialed in, and receive a very consistent great cup daily. I can sit in my kitchen and get started working for the day while the brewer does its thing in the corner, alerting me when it's ready with a gentle chime. And that's not to say that I don't enjoy the relaxing routine of making a pour over by hand in the morning, but there are just some of those mornings where sometimes you just gotta get straight into it. Now, for somebody like my fiance who has a very consistent coffee routine with the same dose, same grind, same fresh beans every single day, the Mocha Master is the perfect brewer already, with a lot less complexity in its design, and will probably outlast us all. For the price of $365, this is a premium brewer. It's practically the same price as the Mocha Master I already own, and a little higher than the Breville Precision Brewer, which I used to own a few years ago. What it lacks for in build quality, it makes up for in a genuinely good brew with some useful features for a niche audience. It's small and lightweight enough to travel with as an all-in-one package if you need a batch brewer on the go. As I said in my SCA video back in April, and a quote from a Reddit user, Fellow has cornered the upper middle class millennial coffee drinker market so hard, and that still holds true here. Maybe you're not interested in those specialty features, but being the trendy millennial you are, you already own a Stag, and maybe even an Opus or an Ode grinder, and the Aiden is going to fit right into that aesthetic and match the rest of your fellowized kitchen, making you want to get it even if you won't take advantage of the features. So what is the future of the Aiden? I'm not sure. I think this product is trying to carve out its own niche in a sea of automated brewers. It makes a solid single-serve brew and a better but not great batch. It's pricey, but that's the cost of R&D. At the very least, this gives us the consumers more options to choose from. And with that, that's going to be my take on the Fellow Aiden. I hope you enjoyed this video. It was a lot of fun putting this one together, and it's really been one of the few products I've been really excited about in a while. As always, if you enjoyed, please drop a like, and if you learned something new, consider subscribing, and I will see you in the next one.